not, they have to have what's called a legally authorized representative, which is someone, like for kids, it would be a parent. If it's an adult who has some type of cognitive impairment or something else where they can't always make good decisions, then that person would be assigned to. There are also appendices for these vulnerable populations that you have to fill out. There's one for kids, there's one for prisoners, there's one for people who are decisionally impaired, so you can fill those out. As far as procedures, we look at, is the information identifiable, and are you just looking at it but not recording it as identifiable? So you're looking at medical records, for example, and you can see, or student records, and you can see who the people are, but when you record it, you don't use their name. So those are some of the things that we look at. What kind of interaction and intervention are you doing? Is it a survey? Is it an interview? Are you drawing blood? Are you giving them some type of medication that's experimental medication? So it depends what you're doing as far as the type of interaction or intervention you have with them. And again, you will complete all the appendices that are appropriate depending on what interventions you do. Like there's an appendix or appendix for internet research, for example. And that is becoming a really big thing because of privacy issues on the internet and people, being able to get your IP address and those kind of things. So depending on, what kind of information you're collecting, usually if you're doing a survey like the SurveyMonkey or something like that, that's not an issue. But if we have had people who have wanted to do surveys with really sensitive information that have to do with alcohol abuse or drug abuse or, any other kind of substance abuse or a history of being in prison and those kind of things. So those kind of things we look at, way more carefully than, George's example where, did you like this part of my class? The risk is huge, the difference in the amount of risk. Okay, risk to subject, again, justified relative to the benefits. They have to be minimized to the greatest extent possible. Okay, and there's always going to be some type of risk. In all research, there's at least a risk of a breach of confidentiality. So you may think that, you're really protecting your subjects and you have a code for them. So, we know that George is subject number 1 and we take George's information and you lock it up somewhere else and we have the data somewhere else. Someone could break in if you have it on your computer, someone could steal your computer, someone could steal your email address. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can happen. So that risk is always there, but you try to make it as small as possible. An example would be there was someone who was doing a study where they were looking at people who had MS, and what they were doing is they were having them go in they were doing water therapy with them, where they would go in a tub that was hot and would circulate the water. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. And so they were going to climb out of this thing, and there was a possibility that they could slip because the floor was tile. So they couldn't say that risk was there, the risk was there, but they would put some things in place like they're going to make sure there's, a towel there all the time on the floor or a rug or something would slip, someone would help them out, they would immediately give them a towel. So they had lots of different things in place. There are also some people, like in physical therapy and exercise science, we sometimes do things where we have people run or we have them exercise, and in some cases they run until they're exhausted and they could die. So the chances of that happening are very minuscule, but they could die. I mean, you've all heard the stories about, young kids on the basketball court or, out running and they just drop dead. So you have to tell people that in your informed consent. And in those cases, if it's on campus, in physical therapy, we also do research with people who have disabilities. So, elderly people who have had a stroke. And so some of the things that we do to minimize that risk is everybody's CPR trained. There's an AED, the thing where you can shock people. We always have a cell phone. There's more than one person usually with them. We make sure that they're, watched very carefully. We know that we can call 911. We know how to get people here, the on-campus police. We know how to get, the Auburn Hills police here. We know that an ambulance can come. So those are all things that you do to minimize risk. Does that make sense to anybody? It's not that you're going to say there is no risk. The risk sometimes is like very, very tiny, but sometimes it's big. You just want to say very clear of it. Procedures for protecting the subject's identity. And again, that's things like using a code or, never even writing their information down. So someone could do a survey anonymously. They could just pick it up, fill it out, and then drop it in some box, and you need to know who they are and all. You have to tell people, both the IRB as well as the people that you're working with, what the benefits are. And again, the benefits that we usually have for the people who are when we do research on campus are not as great. But for people who are doing medical research, they could be cured. tried to get rid of it, and people were still HIV positive, but that was a huge risk. Those people could have died, but the benefit was even bigger, that all the lives they saved from doing that research. So those are the kinds of things that we look at. How important is the knowledge that may result? You may have a study that's, you designed it really well and all that kind of stuff, but none of us can care about your results. It's not going to benefit anybody, so that's something else we look at. And then what's the informed consent process that you're going to use? Okay, so exempt. Exempt means that it's no more than minimal risk, and then this is the definition, minimal risk. It doesn't exceed the risk encountered in ordinary everyday life or in the performance of routine medical, dental, or psychological exams. So if there's something that would happen anyway, that's usually minimal risk. We want to look at that. Usually there's no identifier, so you're not collecting anybody's name or address or zip code or any of those kinds of things. In that case, it would be reviewed either by the IRB chair or a designee. At Oakland, for the most part, people who work in the research office review all the exempt protocols that are submitted. And there's a specific category, a specific application just for exempt. There are 6 categories of exemption, and I can show you those. And you should, as I said earlier, submit it at least 4 weeks prior to the anticipated start date. Okay, it can also be expedited. Okay. Expedited means it's no more than minimal risk, but it just doesn't fit in any of the other categories. For example, if you are doing non-invasive medical procedures or if you're drawing blood, those just aren't categories that are in the exempt, so you bumped up to expedited. It's reviewed by 1 or 2 IRB committee members. Usually it's just 1, but sometimes it could be 2. Okay. There's also an expedited category that you might use for continuing reviews. So there are 7 categories for expedited, and then there's these 2 expedited categories that are continuing review. And for the most part, I don't think you guys will have to worry about that. Okay, and that should be submitted at least 6 weeks before the expected start date. And full board review means that it's more than minimal risk. So people are going to be collecting sensitive information, like I said earlier, about some illegal activity that somebody did that could really get them in trouble or could ruin their reputation, or you're collecting information that could be very damaging to them emotionally. Okay, so you're asking people, you might be doing some study about women who were raped. Okay, that's very sensitive information, and they could have some real setbacks. Or with people who are bulimic or something like that. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? What those are full board?
So, but you are in charge of identifying if these expedite?
No, you are not. The IRB is. So you start out thinking, like we have had people who have thought their study was exempt, and it really wasn't.
So IRB really?
The IRB really does that. Yeah, but you if you read through the categories, you at least will have a clue of where you think you are. We've also had some people who have submitted things that they submit as exempt, and it wasn't even human subjects research because it was really program evaluation, and they just wanted to make sure. And I know you had somebody come and talk about getting things published, correct? Okay, one of the things, and I don't know in all the areas you're in if they do this, but in physical therapy, in a lot of our journals, in order to be published, you have to have something from your IRB. So we had someone, for example, who sort of did this case study about herself. She went to Korea to do some teaching there, and so her research project was about the process she went to be able that she was being culturally sensitive to the people in Korea and how could people best do that. And she really did not need IRB approval because it was exempt. I think eventually they determined it wasn't even human subjects research because it was about herself. You're not going to have yourself for consent to do research about yourself. But she had to have a letter from the IRB that she sent to the publisher to say that the IRB looked at it and determined that it wasn't human subjects research. So that's something I would look at just for yourself if you think you want to publish something for the future. It may not be relevant to anything you do, but that's what it is.
If we want to analyze the contents of internet packets to see if they contain bootleg music or video information that might end up being, material to a criminal investigation, but that's not part of the study. It's just you want to see what percentage of traffic is bootleg on this campus in our computers that we own. Would that require IRB approval?
Are you collecting information I don't even know how you would do this.
IP address,
pretty
IP
technologically
address, I mean,
here.
basically, and right now, all these computers we have right here, there's, you know, IP packets being sent, just like letters in the postal
Right.
mail, with a little header on them, that's open to the public, it's called metadata, that's what you hear about in the news, right? And then inside it, it may be encrypted or it may not be encrypted, but there's a payload inside there that would be, whatever your email is or whatever it is. But now if it's on university equipment and it's university stuff, they own it. Like if the Gmail accounts that you guys have, the university owns that, they can read that, it's legal.
Right, but
But it wouldn't be legal for me, but if I got permission from the university to say, yeah, go ahead, check our packets and see if there's any illegal files on there. What percentage of the data is illegal downloads that's going through our 20 megabit
would you be able
per
to identify the people who sent them?
I think we could.
Yeah, if
I know
you
I could.
identify the people,
He could probably better than me.
I mean, and that in a way is really high risk because those people could go to jail.
If somebody got a hold of the data, But-
Yeah, that's sort of the point. If somebody got a hold of the data, they could do that. So, you know, we can talk more
I'm
about
just curious if that
Yeah.
would be a thing that would break.
I would send this to the IRB.
Would you?
anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, because you are. I mean, if you couldn't identify anybody, and you're just saying there's 25 illegal downloads of a song from wherever or a movie with no way to identify who sent them, then it wouldn't be. But
You
if
can
it's
always
about
identify 'em.
it could be. It's sort of
You can the whole purpose is to be able to get the packet from them.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
plus
that's-
if you're going into people's Gmail accounts, I mean, that's not something.
Well, you
that-
wouldn't necessarily be going into their Gmail accounts.
Okay.
You'd just be looking at the packet that's going across this network.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I know enough
Okay.
about computers to answer
It would
that.
be
I'm
it
sorry.
would be kind of like if somebody was using the interoffice mail system. You know, would they have a reasonable expectation of privacy that nobody looks inside of that little string envelope? Maybe they do.
Yeah, if it says confidential, I mean, if someone says something confidential about me,
But,
and it has a little sticker that says obviously people can rip that confidential sticker out, but
But
I
they
would have a
shouldn't.
reasonable expectation that nobody.
Because
would
I
do
think
that.
people have a reasonable expectation of privacy of that packet.
Right.
However, the university might want to know how much, and actually even a scholar might want to know how much of the packet data that's being downloaded is illegal
Yeah.
or might be illegal.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. I would have to think about that and go back.
Okay, it's just
You know,
I read a report like this and I was wondering, I wonder if they needed IRB report.
Yeah, and again, it depends on how much identifiable information is in there. And the other thing that we do, so if we get a question like that, like if I didn't know the answer, or actually if you didn't know the answer, you can call the Office of Human Research Protection and they will tell you what the rules are. So when if push comes to shove and nobody else knows the answer, we call the Office of Human Research Protection and say, we have this, because sometimes the regulations are a little bit gray, and people interpret them a little bit differently, just like people interpret all regulations or laws and stuff, maybe a little bit differently. So, but that's an interesting question. Okay, the IRB meets the last Thursday of the month in general. Like in February, we're not meeting the last Thursday of the month because that's making a break in our time, but in general, that's. Okay, I think we talked about this. The one thing we didn't talk about is this information. So what happens if you have a full board review? It is assigned to a primary and secondary reviewer. So it's assigned to two people. The two people review it, and then they are the people who present it to the board. Now, the difference between this and like an expedited one is that you have to have the completed application in as good of shape as you can get it with the consent a week before the IRB meeting. And that's because that's when we send out the agenda. And when we send out the agenda, everybody gets access to all the applications that are going to be on the agenda. So somebody might assign it to me. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to talk to the person who's the primary investigator and say, this part makes sense, this doesn't make sense, you forgot to put this in the consent form, whatever. That person has to get all those changes back to me, or back to the IRB, actually, not to me, 1 week before the meeting. And then, so what happens if it's a full board? The primary reviewer presents it to all the applicants of the IRB. Everybody else has access to it, but the primary reviewer is the person that presents it. The secondary reviewer adds anything. People can ask questions. Depending on what it is, sometimes we might ask the researcher to be there if we have questions, or sometimes some people have been available by phone. We used to always have the researcher come. Now we don't do that as much, only because we now have this primary and where it's my job as a primary reviewer to ask as many questions as I can of the research report. And then there's a vote at the full board, and I'll talk about what the votes can be in a minute. Okay, so this is what happens. If an application is approved by the IRB, the university can then review it. Okay, so if we approve something, the university can disapprove it, but if we disapprove something, the university cannot approve it. And probably the best example of where an IRB might approve something and the university would not is if it is like a Catholic university and somebody was doing something on abortion. The IRB might approve it, saying it meets all the regulations for human subjects research, they're really protecting subjects. The university administration might say, this is a Catholic university, we are not doing any research on abortion. But if we disapprove something, the president can't say, oh, this is my buddy, I really want them to do this research, so I'm going to approve it. Okay, we talked about considering the risk-benefit ratio. This is what we need information about, who's being recruited and why. So one of the things you put in the consent form and in the application, but specifically in the consent form, you say you are being invited to be in the study because you are like whatever your inclusion is. Inclusion and exclusion criteria, why do you want people, why are you going to exclude people? A physical therapy example might be somebody where we want to work with patients who have had stroke, but we don't want people who also have cardiac problems on top of that, because what we're going to do, we'll put them at risk for some type of, cardiac, something cardiac happening, and, they may have a heart attack or whatever. So we might exclude those people. Or you're doing something, and you want to know something about students, you're going to, not include anybody who's a student. Or you want to know something about women in politics. You obviously would not include men if you want to know about women in politics, and that's what you're doing. But you can't just exclude somebody just because you don't like that definition. Another example might be sometimes if you're doing like interviews or you have a survey, and you might not want people who don't speak English, just because that would be, you have to get a translator with. Okay, and again, you talked about describing specific methods and protocol. How are the subjects being recruited? You're going to attach any copies of recruitment flyers. We talked about that. Include in the application your research design. Okay, and it's really important to include your research design in there. If you have a crummy research design, first of all, you're not going to get really good results. And second of all, it is not worth it for people to be in your study. The research design doesn't answer a research question. And that's usually when we ask questions about the research design. I looked at a study where the person was looking at medication adherence, and so they were doing this intervention where they were doing education, and then they were going to have them fill out the survey that said that they have medication adherence at, say, like 1 month and 2 months. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was no so I'm not sure how this person's going to know that their medication adherence increased because they don't know what it was before, and there was also no control group. So to me, that was one where I wrote back and said, am I missing something here? It looks like you're not going to be able to answer a research question. So those are the kinds of things we look for in research design. Does that make sense? Even if the risks are very small, if it's a terrible research design where it's not going to answer the question that nobody's going to get right results, it's probably going to improve the question.
Are these designated to relevant faculty members? I mean, in the different departments, or?
Yeah, you mean who reviews them?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the IRB, there are 15 regular members, and then we have some alternates. So there are people from most schools. Right now, there is no one from the College of Arts and Sciences. Well, no, I take it back. There are people from psychology, physical therapy, people from the medical school. There are people from nursing and education. There are 2 physicians that are outside people. The person who is the chief of police in Auburn Hills is on it, because we have to have an outside member and a non-scientist. There's a person from the library. So we try and have a variety of people, and we try and match people up as much as we can. The other thing that we do is, for example, if you're working with children, there are only certain people who usually look at the applications that involve children. I'm one of them because that's what I do clinically. I work with kids, and then the people from education usually look at those. One of my other colleagues who therapy works with kids. So we try to make sure that you have the right expertise. And if we don't, we can have a consult and come in. And probably the one that's the trickiest, that is the most protected, are prisoners. There are some instances, if you're doing research with prisoners, that is, more than minimal risk. You actually have to go to the secretary of the Office of Human Resource Protection and get this signature approval from them. So yeah, we try to make sure we match. And if we don't, and like if I review something, for example, that's a psych study, I call the person from psychology and say, hey, I don't get this, tell me something about it. I want to make sure that, I'm doing this right. So we can always consult with people outside, and we try to do that. Okay, study design, what are they actually do, and how are you minimizing risk? We talked about that. The scientific rationale, there's something called the lay research summary, where you're going to talk about the background and the rationale for what you're doing. So you're basically going to describe the problem like more in an abstract, before you say your purposes. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Conflict of interest, we already talked about. The other thing that this thing about researchers, vendors, and pharmaceutical companies, and I don't know if any of you are doing this because I'm not sure what department you're from, but a lot of times people in biology or sometimes in chemistry or something like that, they might be working with pharmaceutical companies, or you might be working with someone who's designing some new device for a computer or whatever. You need to make sure that when you are done, you own your data, that the company you are working with does not own the data, because you may find something that's not very flattering, or it doesn't, the device doesn't really work, and the company's trying to say that it does work, or there's some drug that isn't going to work, and the pharmaceutical company then will say you can't publish it. So we won't approve anything unless you have a letter, an agreement with a company that says you own the data and you can publish it if you want. And that's, to protect your subjects, but also to protect you. I mean, you don't want to do all that work and then, the company doesn't agree with you, and they own the data and you can't publish it. Okay, privacy has to do with the person, so you want to make sure that there's a private area for the person for consent and data collection. So especially if you're doing something invasive or something where the person, like in physical therapy, we might do something where the person has to be in a bathing suit because we're looking at how their joints move. You're not going to do that like out in the middle of a hallway, for example. And then confidentiality has to do with the data, and we talked about that a little bit, having a code where you would keep the code in a separate place. You want to make sure that all your data is always locked up, or it's on an encrypted, file, USB, computer, whatever, so that no one can get to it. You need to say who's going to have access to the data, so only people involved in the research should have access to the data. And then you would also include in the informed consent, as well as in the application, that when you do a presentation, that nobody would be named in that. And a lot of times, if you're only going to present group data, like aggregate data, you would say that too, that only aggregate data will be presented. But sometimes that's not the possibility. Like I do a lot of qualitative research, so I have pretty small numbers, and I do focus group interviews, so I don't do big numbers, aggregate group data. I say, Susie Q said X. I don't identify who Susie Q is. I give her a number or a pseudonym or something like that. So I wouldn't do aggregate data. But if you just do group data, you can say that. So no one's going to know, who you are, because I'm only going to say, the mean of these 50 people who are in my study is whatever it is. Okay, informed consent. One of the things that's important to remember is that informed consent is a process. It's not just the form that you have them fill out. And that process has to do with things like making sure that people understand what they're being asked to do. Okay, making sure they are voluntarily deciding to participate based on knowing what's in the informed consent and knowing what they're asked to do. Making sure they understand what the risks and benefits are that they participate in the study. Okay, and some of the things we're going to do are listed down here. So things that do is like you want to make sure that they have time to read it. So you're not just going to hand somebody something and say, okay, sign this. Okay, so you want to make sure they have time to read it, that they have time to ask questions, that they have time to consider participating in the study. You can review it with them to say, okay, can you repeat back to me what I'm asking you to do in like a couple sentences? So they would say, yeah, I'm working with this person. They're asking me, they're going to take my heart rate and blood pressure, and then they're going to have me run 5 miles, I'm going to take my heart rate and blood pressure again, or whatever it is you're asking them to do. So those are the things that have to do with the process of the informed consent that are not just in the form. Okay, so here are the 8 basic elements of informed consent. So every informed consent has to have these things in it. So you have to say that it's research, okay, and that's in our template. You have to say what the purpose is. You have to say what procedures are, including which procedures are experimental. And again, that may not be applicable to anything you're doing. How long does the study last? So how long are they going to be participating in this research? And sometimes it's a huge commitment. I have a friend who is actually a subject in the Framingham Heart study, and she's been in it. She's 61, and she's been in the study since she's been like 15 or something. And so she, I think now she probably goes like every couple of years, but for a while she would go there every year, and they would take all these, measures and stuff. So it could be a huge commitment for them, or it could be 10 minutes. But you just have to let them.
So when you approve one application to the IRB, how long does it valid? So it's valid forever, or can
The IRB application?
Yeah.
No, it's good for a year, and then you have to ask for continued review.
So I mean, if you approve that application, so it will be valid. For example, I can start my research in 3 years after the approval.
No, so if it's approved today, okay, next year on January 16th, we would have to reapprove it. Okay, so there's a form that you use for that too.
Are there any ways to bypass the continuing review process if there were no adverse events that had occurred?
No.
No.
So sometimes when we don't do this, but you can do, say a study's approved for 2 years, but eventually it has to be approved in the guidelines where they say you can try to do it once a year.
And if you know from the onset that this project is probably going to take 2 or 3 years, can in the initial application you request for a 2-year approval?
You can
Still can? Okay.
Yeah, so, and the continuing review is basically you just say nothing changed. Yeah. But you really want to do it before it expires, and you will get notification through IRBNet that the information is going to come automatically that says, your project is expiring, your approval is expiring in 3 months, 2 months, and whatever, so. Okay, so you have to have that, you have to have the risks and discomforts that are going to occur, what the benefits are. If there are any alternatives, probably the alternative that we would approve most is people who are in Psych 101, and did everybody have to do a research project when you're in like an introductory psych class or whatever? And they have alternatives like you can be in a research project, any research project, or you can, do some kind of assignment for the class. So those might be an alternative. Sometimes the alternative is just you can choose not to participate, and that's usually what we do. Like you can be in it or you can not be in it. You have to include information about confidentiality of records. Our informed consent right now just says we will do everything in our power to make sure that no one sees your records. And then there is some information in the template about who can see them, like the IRB can come in and do an audit. If you have a federal grant, like through the National Science Foundation or the National Institute of Health or the FDA or somebody, those people can come in and audit your records. So those kinds of entities would have, you have to give people access if they're doing an audit. Okay, medical treatment for related injuries. So for example, depending on what you're doing, that might not happen, but in physical therapy, sometimes we have people who might get 2 different treatments, and there may be something that happens, maybe they're, one of the risks is that, they could fall and get hurt. Okay? And so you would have to put in case of injury, contact, ABCDE, whoever you're contacting, and then there also is a sentence that you put in there that they do not waive their right, basically you're saying they don't waive their right to sue anybody. And I've had, I know some of my students in the past, they put all this information in there about how they can't sue anybody, and they go, well, my dad's a lawyer, or my mom's a lawyer, my boyfriend's a lawyer, my wife's a lawyer. It doesn't matter if they're a lawyer, you can't do that. Maybe people can sue you if they want, and people do have the right as human subjects to be protected. Right, and then you have to put contact information, who you contact with research questions, and that's usually you. And if you have a faculty advisor, be your faculty advisor. Who do they contact about their rights as subjects in human research? That would be the institution review board, and again, this injury thing. So, and then you have to say that participation is voluntary, that they can choose to be in the study or not. They can leave the study anytime they want. They can refuse to answer questions if you get questions on a survey. Sometimes people may choose not to answer some of the questions. And if there's something where you absolutely have to have that information, like one thing builds on another thing and builds on another thing. So if they drop out of part A, they can't do part B, you would just tell them that. There's something in there too that says, that goes along with this voluntary, that if they choose not to participate or they drop out or whatever, that it won't hurt their reputation with you, with your faculty advisor, with Open University, with wherever you're collecting the data, if it's a school or whatever. Okay, so here are some additional elements of informed consent. This is if there's any unforeseeable risk, and that has to do primarily with embryos or fetuses. Conditions under which the research might be terminated by you as the researcher. So they have, suppose you're doing something where they have to do a series of, learning modules or exercises or whatever you're having them do, and they don't do that, you can say if you fail to do A, B, C, D, E, which is part of the study, and they have to do it, then you will be asked to leave the study. Any additional cost to the subjects? And in medical sorts of things, and this could happen like in counseling, I don't know that it would happen other places, there may be treatment, and the treatment is really, they would get the treatment anyway, but you're looking at treatment A versus treatment B. So they are responsible for paying for the treatment, because the treatment itself is not really part of the research, they would get the treatment anyway, but they wouldn't necessarily have to pay for all the assessment kinds of things. Does that part make sense to people? But if you say, okay, you're going to be in the study and you're going to take this super duper exam or assessment or whatever, and the exam costs $300 and they have to pay for it, if they want to be in the study, you need to tell them. Consequences of early withdrawal by subjects, again, it's important for medical sorts of interventions. In the psych department, a lot of times they have things where people get credit if there's a multi-part thing and they get 3 classroom credits, or they get 100 points or whatever they get. They might say you have to complete, if you only do part 1, you would only get 100 points instead of 300 points, which is the total for all of them. That should say may, not long. Significant new findings that may affect their willingness to participate. Again, that's usually used a lot for clinical trials. So they're trying out some drug, they find out, it causes problems with fetuses for women when they get pregnant. They would want to tell people that. The approximate number of the subjects. Okay, so comprehension, it should be organized. We have a template. All you have to do is plug your stuff into the template. They need ample time for consideration and to ask questions. We already talked about. You want to use lay language for subjects, so people aren't going to know all the lingo that you use, whatever you use. So you want to either define what you use or try to put it in some type of lay language. And sometimes there's just not lay language. Like we use something in physical therapy to measure joints called the goniometer, and it basically looks like a big protractor. And so when we use that, we explain what it is. Or you can include a picture if it's something that's real